12 hours. That's how long I'd been on shift when the last call came in. Elderly male, 73 years old, complaining of fatigue. Just tired. I almost didn't take it. I'm really glad I did. Let me set the scene for you. It was a Tuesday in late October, one of those gray, damp days where the whole city feels like it's operating at about 60%. My partner that shift was a guy named Danny. 7 years in, great instincts, absolutely terrible taste in gas station sandwiches. We'd been running calls since 6 in the morning. A fall at a nursing home, a teenager who'd had a panic attack during a math test, a construction worker with a hand laceration that turned out to be nothing serious. Standard stuff. By hour 12, you're not exactly what I'd call sharp. You're functional, you're professional, but your body is running on muscle memory and coffee, and your brain is already halfway home. So when the call came through at 6:47 p.m., elderly male, residential address, chief complaint listed as fatigue, I will be honest with you, my first reaction was not concern, it was relief. Fatigue calls are usually straightforward. You show up, you assess, you reassure, sometimes you transport, sometimes you don't. 45 minutes and you're done. Danny looked at me across the cab and said, "Easy one to end the day." I nodded. Let's hope. We had no idea. The address was in a quiet residential neighborhood. Old houses, mature trees, the kind of street where everyone knows their neighbors' cars. We pulled up to a small brick house, well-kept, flower boxes in the windows, a welcome mat that said something about being grateful. The kind of home that tells you someone has lived there a long time and taken care of it. A woman met us at the door, 70s, neatly dressed, clearly distressed but holding herself together. She introduced herself as Eleanor. She said her husband Harold had been off since the morning, wouldn't eat, wouldn't get off the couch, said he was just tired, kept telling her not to make a fuss. She'd finally called when he stopped responding to her questions with full sentences. I asked how long he'd been symptomatic. She paused. Since he woke up, I think. Maybe before. That pause. I filed it away. We followed her through a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs, decades of a life together. Kids, grandkids, vacations, anniversaries, into the living room. Harold was on the couch, 73 years old, a big man once, you could tell. Large shoulders, large hands, but sitting there he looked smaller than he should have. His color was off. Not dramatically, not the kind of thing you'd clock from across the room, but up close, wrong. A grayish cast to the skin around his mouth. His breathing was quiet but slightly labored. He looked up at me and said, "I told her not to call. I'm fine." His voice was slower than the words wanted to be, a subtle drag. I smiled and said, "Let's just take a look, Harold. Humor me." And that's when I started paying very close attention. We run through the standard assessment: blood pressure, pulse, oxygen saturation, responsiveness. Harold answers my questions, but there's a latency to it, like the signal has to travel a little further than it should to get back to me. His blood pressure read 160/94, elevated, but not catastrophically. His pulse was 61, slow side of normal. His oxygen sat was 96%. On paper, none of this should be setting off alarm bells, but something was. I asked him if he had any pain. He shook his head. No pain, just tired, like I said. I asked where he felt tired, in his muscles, his eyes, behind his eyes. He thought about it longer than the question warranted. Then he said, "My arm feels heavy." "Which arm?" "Left." I kept my expression completely neutral. Inside, my entire body shifted into a different gear. Left arm heaviness in a 73-year-old male who was otherwise presenting as fatigued and slightly off. No chest pain, but here's the thing they don't show you on television. Not every cardiac event announces itself with crushing chest pain and dramatic collapse. Atypical presentations are real, especially in older patients, especially in men who have spent 70 years being told to push through. I looked at Danny. He'd heard it too. The look we exchanged lasted maybe half a second. I asked Eleanor whether Harold had any history of heart disease. She said he had a stent placed 6 years ago. He took aspirin every day, had a cardiologist he saw twice a year. I asked Harold if he had taken his medications that morning. Another long pause. I think so. I usually do. We needed a 12-lead ECG, right now. I set up the leads while Danny talked to Eleanor in the hallway, kept her calm, got her to pull Harold's medication list and his cardiologist's information. Harold watched me attach the electrodes with a kind of patient resignation. He'd been through this before, after the stent. He knew what the equipment meant. "You think it's my heart," he said. I said, "I want to rule some things out." He nodded slowly. "Eleanor's going to be upset." "She's going to be fine," I told him. "You focus on sitting still for me." The machine took the reading. I looked at the strip, and there it was. ST elevation. Subtle. Not the dramatic spike that makes textbook pages, but present, real, consistent with what we call a STEMI, ST elevation myocardial infarction, a heart attack, a slow one, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't scream at you, the kind that kills people who decide to wait it out. Harold had been in the process of having a heart attack, possibly for hours, while he sat on his couch, while he told his wife he was just tired, while he insisted she not make a fuss. I called it in immediately, activated the cardiac alert protocol, told dispatch we had a STEMI and needed a cath lab on standby. When I told Harold what we'd found, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Huh." Just that. Huh. 73 years of understatement right there. We had Harold on the stretcher and moving within 4 minutes. Eleanor came with us. She sat in the front with Danny, her hands folded in her lap, not speaking much. I stayed in the back with Harold. The drive to the hospital takes about 11 minutes from that neighborhood. Those 11 minutes are some of the clearest in my memory from that entire year. Harold wasn't in acute distress. The aspirin he'd taken that morning had likely helped, slowed things down enough to give us a window. We started him on additional treatment en route. He stayed conscious, stayed talking. At one point, he asked me how long I'd been doing this. I said, 11 years. He said, "You like it?" I thought about that for a second. "Yeah," I said, "most days." He smiled, slow, tired, but real. "Good," he said. "Somebody's got to do it." We handed him off to the cath lab team at the hospital. The interventional cardiologist told us afterward that the blockage was significant, 90% occlusion in a major coronary artery. He estimated Harold had been in the early stages of the infarction for somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. 4 to 6 hours sitting on his couch, being tired. The procedure went well. Harold was in recovery by 9 that evening. Eleanor called the station the next day to say thank you. She was crying, and then she apologized for crying, which, I will be honest with you, that got to me a little. I almost didn't take that call. Not because I was negligent, not because I didn't care, but because 12 hours of this job will make your instincts go a little quiet, and a call logged as fatigue, elderly male, just doesn't scream emergency. It whispers it. And when you're exhausted, you don't always hear whispers. If Danny and I had clocked out 5 minutes earlier, if we'd been 1 block farther away when it came through, if another crew had caught it, a crew maybe less familiar with atypical STEMI presentations, or a crew that heard fatigue and reached for the reassurance script instead of the 12-lead, I don't know, maybe Harold still makes it. Medicine has a way of finding windows. But maybe he doesn't. What I know for certain is this. There was a version of that Tuesday where Harold waited another hour, where Eleanor convinced herself it was nothing, where he went to bed early and didn't wake up. That version exists. I've seen versions close to it. But that's not the version that happened. The version that happened is that a 73-year-old man with broad shoulders and no tolerance for fuss sat in his living room surrounded by 40 years of photographs and said, "My arm feels heavy," and I was in the room to hear it. That's the version that happened. And I think about Harold sometimes when I'm near the end of a long shift and a call comes in that sounds like nothing. I think about the fact that the calls that sound like nothing are sometimes exactly the ones you need to take seriously. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning labels. You just have to show up. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely. If you've had a moment like this one, a close call, a decision that turned out to matter more than you knew at the time, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Hit the like button if this story meant something to you, and subscribe if you want to hear more. There are a lot more calls where this one came from. Stay safe out there.